All right, welcome. This is the Introduction to Modular Synthesis workshop. And by synthesis, we're talking about music synthesis, not like FPGA synthesis or logic synthesis or anything. This is good old school analog synthesis, but done on a simulated computer program called VCV Rack. And if you're a noob to analog synthesizers, this is a great place to start because it's free. You don't have to buy any expensive equipment. Um, so why don't we just start looking at things? So I have it running here. When you first start it up, I'm going to zoom out so you can see all the modules. Um, Scroll bar there. And so this is called modular synthesis because these are synthesizer modules and you can grab them and move them around. There's kind of two racks here, but there's an infinite number of racks. Well, not infinite, but effectively infinite number of places you can put modules. And there are a whole bunch of modules, not just these. There's lots more. And we'll take a look at some of them and add a couple. So I can move them around. You can connect the modules with patch cords, which are these colored lines here. Um, and one of the beautiful things here is that unlike a real hardware synthesizer, you can basically use an infinite number of patch cords and they all work. So this is subtractive synthesis. This is a metaphor that's very popular with a lot of digital synthesizers too, because it's a nice way to think about generating and shaping sound. And it's kind of the way a lot of musical instruments work and the way your voice works too. So what you do, things go from basically left to right. You start with an oscillator, and that typically has a very rich harmonic waveform that's buzzy or has some high frequencies. And then you have a voltage controlled filter, which lets you filter out or emphasize or remove certain frequencies and certain harmonic components. And this is actually not too different from the way your voice works. If you think of the oscillator as your vocal cords, has kind of this buzzy little sound going on. And then the filters is your vocal tract, which has different resonances, which change depending on how you move your mouth and your tongue and your oral cavity, things like that. And then finally, there's this thing called an envelope generator or an ADSR, which gives you slowly varying control voltages, which can change how the filter works, and it changes an amplifier to make it louder or softer. Okay, let me see, we get everybody in who needs to join? All right. So let's just get started patching and things. I showed you the module, and you can grab them and move them around. And I'm going to press a Z. I'm going to play a note because this right now we're hooked up to the computer keyboard on my laptop. And this is giving us a gate signals and a volt per octave signal. If I just play ZXCVB, that gives me the first notes of a major scale. It's a keyboard. And if I do S and D, those give me the half steps, the black notes. So the white notes are ZXCVB, and there's another step up at W, I think. QW, that's another octave up. So that gives you some notes you can play right off the bat if you're just starting out with this preset here. Okay, so what's going on here? So things, as I said, are moving generally left to right. There's some stuff that goes backwards, but that's okay. What this is this you can also hook up to a Midi keyboard. This Midi CV things gives you control voltages. And in the old days, you'd have an analog keyboard, which would give you a volt per octave. Every time you pressed a key, that would give you a voltage, and you press a higher key, it would give you a higher voltage, and would give you a gate signal. When your key is down, the gate is enabled. When the key is up, the gate lets go and it turns off. And that's hooked up to various things that are controlling and shaping the things. So one of the things let's just do now is we're going to remove the control voltage now and just grab that and let it go. And that will unplug the control voltage from our oscillator here. And now we can try playing on the keyboard. And it's the same note. Nothing's changing because we're not giving it a control voltage. So we can plug that back in. Another thing we can do is we can look at the output of this oscillator on the oscilloscope here. This is super cool, so we can actually visualize what's going on. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so just people can see. Okay. All right. So if you want, just to note, all the white circles, those are inputs, and all the black ones, circles, the circles with black borders, those are outputs. Now, in a hardware synthesizer, you can hook outputs to each other, which is rarely a good idea. Doesn't usually cause damage, but it certainly can't rule that out. But here with this thing, you cannot connect the black um, outputs to each other. You have to connect a black output to a white input. If you want to connect an output to multiple inputs, you can hold Control key down and click on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect the scope X input just by grabbing it and dragging it away. It goes away. And I'm going to hit Control key on the sawtooth and drag that over to the input. And so that's doing a sawtooth. I'm going to change the time scale a little bit. Okay, so one thing about this program, when I'm changing the knobs, my pointer disappears, so you can't tell what I'm doing. So I will try and kind of circle the knob I'm about to change and remind you what I'm doing. So I'm going to change the time base. I'm going to make that a little faster so you can see the waveform here. And there's a couple ways to change the waveform. Here's one that makes it an actual sawtooth, and you can see why it's called a sawtooth. So I'm going to unhook that. There's also a square wave we can look at. Looks like a square wave. There's a triangle wave. Guess what that's going to look like? Yep, looks like triangles. And finally, the sinusoidal wave. Okay, and that's a pure sinusoidal tone. We actually use the sinusoidal less often than the other ones because it doesn't really have any harmonics. So you put it into the filter and you get a sawtooth out, a sinusoid out. So it's just actually a little less interesting. Okay, so we're still getting all the same note here. No matter what key you press on the keyboard, you're going to get the same note here. So if you want to change the note, this big dial here changes the frequency. So I'm going to hit a note and twiddle this knob. So this changes the center frequency of where that oscillator is oscillating. Now, kind of the cool thing about analog synthesis is basically any knob you can turn with your fingers, you can turn using a control voltage. And we've already seen how you can use the control voltage from the keyboard to change it, but you can use another control voltages. And so I'm going to show you now how to add another module. So if you click on an empty space, I'm going to click on the space right below the oscillator, and you right click, you'll get a whole list of modules which you can add. And these are just the stock modules. If you go to the VCV Rack website, there's about a zillion more. And a lot of them are free and a lot of them you pay money for, which is great to support people doing cool stuff. Okay, so let's select the LFO here. So I'm just going to click that and that will put it hopefully someplace you find it. Sometimes it puts it on top so you can't see it. Actually, before we do that, let's add another module. Let's right click, and there's this thing called a 8-vert down here on the second row. Let's add one of those too. And the beauty of this is these things are free, and you can have as many as you want or as many as your computer will let you use. And they're all available for you to use and as many as you want. If you want a really fat sound, you can stack oscillators together. Wendy Carlos for Switched On Bach used 6 voltage controlled oscillators on top of each other. And because they're all analog, they're not quite at the same frequency. So that slightly different frequency gives it a super fat, super juicy sound. And you can do the same thing with a chorus or delay in their signal chain, but we're not going to get to that. So anyway, what the 8-vert does is this can give you a variable voltage output. So we can take this output here from this top knob, and I'm going to connect it to the volt per octave pin here. So, and now this will give us a variable voltage output, which is then controlling the frequency of this thing. So now if I play a note and I turn this knob, you can get a whole range of notes out of this, because this is 10 volts per octave. This is 1 volt per octave, and we have 10 volts coming out of here. So we've got 10 octaves to play around with. Okay, but maybe this is a little too tweaky. It'd be hard to actually play something musically interesting with this because it's like a theremin. It's all over the place. So let's connect it to this other input called FM for frequency modulation. And what that does is that gives you a knob where you can control the amount that this voltage is going to change the frequency. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to play a note. And I'm going to turn that knob, this knob down here, and nothing's happening. Why? Because this is all the way down there. If we give this control voltage a little bit of a tweak, then I can do the same thing, play a note. There we go. And the more you turn this knob, the more the input voltage affects the frequency. Okay, so I will show you an example of that. I'm going to disconnect the 8-vert, and actually I might just I'm going to right click to get rid of things. You can right click and delete. Another thing I'd like to show you is the plugin. What you can do is for any of these plugins, you can go look at the source code. This is all open source. If there's something that you don't like and you think they could do better, then you're welcome to go and hack on the source code and fix things up. So this is super open and super great. So right now I'm just going to delete this because we can get it back if we need it. So now we're going to use this thing called an LFO. This is a low frequency oscillator is what the LFO stands for. And this has just scroll down a little bit. This also has outputs. It has a sinusoidal output. It has a triangle, saw, and square root. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the sinusoidal output and I'm going to hook that up to our frequency modulation here. Okay. Now, since this knob is a little bit here, this should give us a little bit of frequency modulation, which is just changing the frequency in a sinusoidal manner, a little bit like tremolo. I'm sorry, vibrato. So I'm going to turn that down, play a note. Okay, so this knob changes the frequency of the control voltage oscillator. And we can use different modulation waveforms. Here's a sawtooth. You can hear what that sounds like. And square wave. And this will sound a little bit like a European siren, just high, low, high, low, high, low. And to get the different interval, you control this, how much the control voltage affects the frequency. Okay, so I'm going to check the chat. Are there any questions? Yeah, okay, so that's a great question. Do I have a recommendation of actual Eurorack modules to get started with? And no, I don't. I'm sorry. That's a rabbit hole which rapidly gets expensive. If you're going to get started with synthesis, you definitely want an oscillator, you definitely want a filter, you definitely want an envelope generator, but there's a whole different flavors of different makers and different approaches. A lot of them will have VCV Rack plugins, so you can actually try it in software and see if you like it before you actually put down money on them. Okay, how are we doing on time? We're doing great on time. This is fantastic. Hopefully people are enjoying this. If there are any questions, I'll try and get to the chat every now and then as I catch a breath. I'm going to talk about the filter next, and then I'm going to give everybody a couple of minutes to play around with your knob if you're following along, and see what kind of sounds you can get. Okay, so let's put things back together. I'm going to disconnect the frequency modulation there. I'm going to reconnect the volt per octave from the keyboard back to our voltage controlled oscillator, and this should restore our original patch. And I'm just going to test that by playing a little scale. Good. Okay, if for some reason you plug things and you can't remember the way it was, you can always say File, New, and it'll start up right back with this original setup. This is kind of a preset. You can change the preset, but this is a great place to get started with. All right. Okay, so this is subtractive synthesis, is this paradigm for generating sounds. You start with this oscillator, which has rich set of harmonics, and you use the filter to shape or remove some of those harmonics, or even emphasize those filters. So just to play around with the filter, let's just spin the knob here as you're play a note. Okay, that's not doing much because this is being controlled with a control voltage from the envelope generator. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But let's just turn this knob all the way down. The frequency control voltage right here, I'm just going to turn it all the way down so the envelope generator is not changing it at all. That way we can use this knob and just do it manually. Okay. Down here, I'm playing a note. You can't hear it. Why? Because the filter has filtered everything out. And only as we get up higher, I'm going to turn this down, the attack here, so you can hear it. Oops, I thought I disconnected that. Let me disconnect that. There we go. Oh, I know what I did. I went all the way down with the frequency control voltage, and this is negative. So that was using an inverted envelope. I'll talk about that later. Anyway, you can just disconnect the wire that was plugged into the frequency, which came from the ADSR. And that'll let you turn this knob automatically. So now I'm turning the frequency knob here. And you see, as you open up this frequency, it gets brighter and brighter. As we close down the frequency, it'll get darker and darker as it filters out some of the high frequencies. I think I just saw it. Okay, some questions. How do you add a cable without unplugging the existing one? You hit Control as you're adding the cable. Bob, I'm afraid I can't help you. Maybe you can take that offline if somebody in the chat can help Bob. Yeah, so try disconnecting the frequency, and if you're not getting any sound, make sure you turn up the voltage control knob here, because if that's all the way down, that's filtering out all the sounds. And only if you turn that up will you get some sounds. So it should be higher than 12 before you get some sounds. Okay, so another thing that's really fun to play with is something called resonance. And this kind of controls how peaky your filter is. Right now, it's not very peaky. You can have it get very peaky, in which case there's a peak that lets through and will, in fact, amplify some of the harmonics. And so if we turn that about 1 or 2 or 3, we should get a good peaky resonance sound. You can kind of hear what that's doing. Okay, now this resonance also has a control voltage input. So we can do fun stuff like let's hook up this low frequency oscillator to it. Oops, didn't mean to go in that direction. So from the sine wave output there, don't scroll down on me. We're going to go to the resonance. Actually, no, let's go to the frequency, and that way you can hear it. Okay, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so people can see what's going on here. So from the sine wave output of the LFO, if you need an LFO, right-click and click on the LFO1 there, and that'll give you an LFO. Right-click on an empty space. Sometimes it'll put it in a different place. You might need to zoom out. So anyway, we have the sine wave going to the frequency input. We have a fair amount of resonance up there, about 1 or 2 o'clock. And now we can play a note. I'm going to increase the frequency there. All right, good stuff. Okay, and the frequency, this is 0, I think, in the middle. That's no thing. If we go 1 or 2, that gives us a little bit. So I'm going to take the frequency down there a bit. So anyway, that's some cool wah tricks. Okay, one more thing to talk about on the filter. We can take away, I'm just going to disconnect the frequency here. Oh no, I'm going to leave that in there. If you turn up the resonance high enough, the filter will oscillate by itself and it will give you a sine wave output. So I'm going to turn that up, and at some point, you won't hear anything until you press a key. So let's just listen to the filter by itself. So let's disconnect the sawtooth input. So this input, so now if we disconnect that, all we're hearing is the frequency filter. So I'm going to play a note, and this is actually the resonance of this voltage controlled filter. If we're around 3 o'clock here, they take that down, you won't hear anything. If we take it up to 3 or 4 or 5, you get this. And this is being driven by the frequency, and the frequency is being controlled by this low frequency oscillator. And this control voltage tells you whether it's positive or negative. So let's switch this to the sawtooth. And this is a good way to get some UFO sound. And if we take this knob here and make it negative, then it'll go in the other direction. We'll get some pew pew sounds. All right. So if you're making sounds for your science fiction movie, this is a great way to get some sounds. Okay, while we're here, one more thing I want to show you, which is back on the oscillator. Okay, I'm going to hook up the square wave output now. Instead of the sawtooth, I'm going to hook up the square wave. And I'm also going to hook that up, hit Control, and hook up the square wave to the oscilloscope. Okay, I want to show you one more thing, which is pulse width modulation, which is this knob here, which is the pulse width. And what does that do? Well, let's turn this knob and find out. You can see on the scope that it turns it from a square wave down to a sharp pulse. And that does really interesting things to the frequency spectrum. So I'm just going to play this. Oh, let me take down the filter again. Take down the resonance there. I forgot to do that. Let's take the resonance back to maybe 12 o'clock or something. There we go. Actually, maybe you need a little more frequency here. There we go. Now you can hear it. So put the frequency around 3 o'clock and the resonance around 11 or 12, and that'll let this waveform through pretty unmolested. So as you change the pulse width, you can hear a lot of interesting harmonic things going on. And the pulse width modulation also has a control voltage, which we can hook up let's hook up a sinusoid to that, the pulse width modulation. And we need to turn up this knob so it actually affects the pulse width. And now you can see the pulse width changing from this LFO. Let's take that down a bit. So that's kind of a cool, rich, changing thing. And here's a pro tip. If you turn up the frequency, you get the rave hoover sound that's, you know, like in Darude Sandstorm. So it's a super rich, super kind of annoying thing. And you turn up the control voltage even more. Super rich and super great. Okay, let's take a little break here. I'm going to be here. If you just want to play around with things yourself, any questions, shout them out on the chat and I'll get back to you. And just take a couple minutes. We got plenty of time to play around with some of those knobs and see what they do. Or go pet your dog or whatever you need to do. Okay, so I'm just going to answer a couple of questions. ELE asks, can I export sounds for this for Korg Volca sampler? If it's a sampler, you should definitely be able to sample any of the sounds you create with this and play it back on a sampler. I'm not quite sure how you would sample it, but you could just get the audio output somehow and record that into a WAV file or however you get things to your sampler. And I'm happy people are enjoying the workshop. You know, if this is too boring for you, if you know what you're doing and you want to peace out and just play with the knobs and not listen to me, that's totally cool. Go for it. You know, if I just introduced you to this program, my work here is done. So while people are fooling around, just a couple stories from the old days. If you play an analog synthesizer, because 1 octave of 1 volt will change the tuning by 1 octave. A very small amount of voltage, a very slight voltage difference, will really give you different notes and put your things out of tune. So the classic thing is you do your sound check with your analog synthesizer back in the day in the rock club in the afternoon, and it's cold and they have the door open because a good rock club smells bad and they're trying to air it out. And by the time you get to gig time at night when it's full of people and they turn all the stage lights, it's 20 degrees warmer. And all your analog oscillators have all drifted and now they are all completely all out of tune. So you got to remember to tune them up quickly before you actually start playing. Otherwise, it's going to sound terrible. But that's not a problem with the digital stuff. All right, let us move on a little bit. We're almost done with our basic rack here. Let's talk about the envelope generator, which is a thing called ADSR here. This stands for attack, decay, sustain, and release. And first, let's talk a little bit about the gate and the retrigger. The gate is a signal that goes high when you press down a key, and it goes low when you lift your finger up off the key. So I'm just going to unplug this from the scope. I'm going to plug the gate into the scope just so you can see this. You don't have to do this, but if you want to follow along, press Control so we can get two outputs from the gate over to the scope. Now what I need to do is take the time base way, way down because this is much slower than a waveform. So I'm going to turn that way down. And unfortunately, this claims it triggers, but it doesn't actually do a great job of triggering. So it just turns on whenever it feels like it. So anyway, we can see if I hit a key, it goes up and then it goes down when I take my finger off the key. Ooh, I'm going to unhook the pulse width modulation there. Okay, I'm going to also take down the time a little bit more, just so you can see. On, off, on, off. Okay, so you can see that gate here is now hooked up to the gate of the envelope generator. And there's also this thing that retriggers. This gives you a little pulse every time you hit a key. So if you're holding one key down and hitting another key, this will retrigger it. And what the gate and the retrigger do is this is a little sequencer, and it has 4 stages. And let's see how this works. This is creating a slow moving control voltage, which you can use to control the frequency. Right now, it's also being we're using it to control the output level. So this is a mixer. The output is going to the mixer. If we didn't have this mixer would be on all the time, and we'd hear nothing but sounds from the oscillator because the oscillator is going on the time. It's only because this is not triggered we're muting the sound, and we need to be thankful for that because it'd be super annoying if it wasn't. If you want to do an experiment, unhook that and you will see everything going straight through. I'm not going to do that because that's going to be annoying for everybody. All right, so let's talk about the envelope. It has 4 stages. The attack and the decay are times, and the release is a time, and the sustain is a level. So the sustain is slightly different. All right, so I'm going to take that output, hit Control, and whoops, I should disconnect the gate from the scope. I'm going to connect this to the scope, the output of the ADSR, so you can kind of see what's going on. So I'm going to hit a note. Let me see if I can catch it. So you can see it goes up really quickly. That's the attack, because that's maximum or the shortest amount of time, and then decay is kind of longer. Now I'm going to take down the decay, make that shorter. I'm going to make that really short. And you can see that's really short there. And you can make that almost nothing. So that's got just this little click at the beginning. Okay, the sustain is the level. That's how high up it goes after the decay when you're holding the key down. If I turn the sustain all the way up, or I can turn it all the way down so you get a lot more decay. Let's give it a little bit more decay too, so you can see how that works. So that's how long it decays to the sustain, and the release, the final part of the thing, is how long it decays after you lift up with the note. So let's see if we can see that. I'm going to make that super short, play a note, and you can see it stopped almost immediately. Or we can have it a long fade, and this is good for bell tones or something. Play a note, let go, and you can see it's going there. I'm going to lift the sustain up a little bit just so you can see that long release. Okay, And what's nice about this module, you can see it lights up little indicator lights as it steps through the 4 stages. And so I'm going to give everything a little bit of time. Here I'm going to give it a little bit of attack. You can see here how it's going to kind of swoop in now. I'm going to give it even more attack. Okay, I'm going to make it short decay and a short release, or shorten the release. No release at all here, or not much release. So this is almost a backwards sound, a slow attack and a quick release. Okay, so you can use the ADSR to control the frequency cutoff too, and that's how the original patch was, with the output of this also controlling the voltage controlled filter. In fact, let's do this. Let's just all start from scratch, and that way all the knobs will be all reset. So I'm going to go to File. I'm going to say New, and that's just going to it's going to complain that I didn't save this. That's okay. There's not much we're saving there. So I'm going to clear this and start a new patch because I just said New up here on the menu. All right. So same kind of thing. And so here you can see the output of the envelope generator is also patched to the voltage control filter. And that's why you can put the filter all the way down here, because the control voltage, which is very strongly controlled here from the envelope generator, is going to change the frequency of the voltage control filter too. And to hear that, let's play a note. Oops. When you do that, you need to set the device here. So hopefully, there, I can hear that. Can people hear that? Did I break it? Just checking. Oops. Actually, this is a good part to start. There were a bunch of people waiting. I'm sorry I didn't see you there in the chat because I was talking, I was yakking. So anyway, we just kind of reset our synthesizer here, and we're going to see how the envelope generator controls the voltage control filter. So just play a note here. And if we raise the filter here, it's going to get brighter and brighter. Let's turn up the resonance so you can hear how the frequency of this filter is changing over time. Hear that nice decaying swoop sound? That's the filter being controlled by the envelope generator. And quite often you'll use a separate envelope generator for the voltage controlled filter, but this is a little simpler because this is controlling the output level through the mixer, and it's also controlling the filter here. So if you make that decay a little faster, now on the envelope generator, you'll hear a little quicker swoop on the frequency of the filter. And you can get kind of cool laser pew pew sounds if you make that faster. All right. I'm going to take about a 10-minute break right here. And if you got questions, send them into the chat. Feel free to play around with all the things you know about. In about 10 minutes, I'll come back and then we'll look at, we'll build a little drum machine using a sequencer, and that will be kind of fun. So feel free to take a break or play with the knobs and the patch cords using what you've learned. If there's questions in the chat, I will try and get you. Bob, if you're getting high pitches, try changing the frequency on the voltage control oscillator. So take this knob and turn it down. All right, so I'm just going to peace out here for about 5 minutes, and I will see you see you then, and we will continue on. It's 2. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Good to have a break. Hope everybody got up and stretched. Give people a couple seconds to come back. If you're just joining us now, this is the workshop Introduction to Modular Synthesis, and it's audio synthesis using synthesizer modules. And I'm just going to put the link to the wiki in the chat again. If you're just joining us and you need to download and install VCV Rack, the instructions are right there on a link I just dropped in the chat. Okay, I'm assuming people are with me. Anybody want to say hi on the chat? And we'll proceed. Thank you. Awesome. Good stuff. A little weird because I can see your people are joined, but don't have the usual thing with the video, so I can't see your lovely faces. You are stuck, unfortunately, with mine. Okay, onwards and upwards. All right. Let's look at a couple other modules that are fun to play with. All right. A very useful module for generating interesting sound is a noise module. And instead of an oscillator, which gives you pure tones, a noise module gives you, as you might expect from the name, noise. And so let's just add a noise module. Okay, where did they put the noise module? Here we go. It's on the third row when you right-click. So right-click on an empty space in the rack, and we're going to the third row here, which is the noise module. And we're going to click that. And let's put that under the voltage-controlled oscillator because we're going to use that as an oscillator. Now this has no control voltage inputs, it's just all outputs. So it's making noise all the time. And so I'm just going to show you what that looks like. The top, zoom in a bit. The top output is white noise, and we hook that up to the scope. It looks noisy. Hello, noise. And I'm just going to patch that into a mixer. Actually, before I do that, let me take down the mixer gain. Somebody just joining, so let them in. Okay, I'm going to take down the gain. It's hard to see because it's dark gray on black. I'm going to patch the white noise into the mixer here, and then I'm going to just turn it on so you can hear it. Sounds like noise. Sounds like the old FM channel when it wasn't tuned to a station. Now there's different outputs here. There's white, pink, red, violet, blue, gray, and at the very bottom there's black noise. Okay, so the various colors are various amounts of frequency. The pink and the red have less high frequency and more low frequency, in analogies to light. Red is the longer wavelengths, the lower frequencies. And violet and blue are more high frequency and less low frequency. White is all frequencies, but it's from a Gaussian distribution. Black noise is from a uniform, so it's even a little bit more random, if you want to call it that, than the white noise. And I forget what the gray noise is. I think that's a low pass filtered for using, if you want to use it as a control voltage for time dependent things. But we can stick with white because that's a perfectly good place to start. So instead of the voltage control oscillator going into our patch here, let's take the white noise here. So I'm going to disconnect the sawtooth from our voltage controlled oscillator, and I'm going to connect the white noise here. Okay, so now if I play a note, we're not going to hear a pitched sound. We're going to hear a kind of whooshy, breathy sound from the noise. Okay, we're hearing a lot of frequency. We're hearing a lot of filter going on that. So let's just take the control voltage, put that around 12 o'clock here. So I'm just turning this knob to around 12 o'clock, and that's going to turn off all the control voltage from the envelope generator. And that way we're just going to hear the white noise through the amplifier. I need to do it a little bit more. Oh, right. The frequency is turned all the way down. So I'm going to raise this up while playing a note. Here you can hear how the filter changes the frequency of the white noise. So if it's all the way up, you hear pure white noise. And then we can filter out some of the frequencies, and it gets kind of smoother and muddier. And this is a good way to really hear what the resonance does. If we turn that up to maybe 2 o'clock on the resonance here, then you can really hear it gives you a frequency peak in the filter. And you can even use the keyboard to play this frequency. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the frequency control voltage. I'm going to disconnect the ADSR, and holding control, I'm going to connect the keyboard voltage per octave to the frequency here. I've never done this before. I wonder if this works. And I think we need to give the frequency control voltage a little bit gain here. Okay, so now as I hit different keys, I can kind of play the filter as if it were an oscillator. So that's an interesting way to get sounds out of that. Okay. I'm going to disconnect that now, and then, whoops. Now, also disconnect the noise. I'm going to keep the noise here because we're going to use it for later when we make a drum machine. We're going to make a Kraftwerk snare using the noise. And I disconnected the sawtooth from the filter. So I'm going to reconnect that. And I need to remember to turn down the frequency knob up here. So I'm going to turn that all the way down. And hopefully that gets us somewhere back to where we were. Let's see, I disconnected something. What am I forgetting? Yes, the frequency has to come from the envelope generator. Otherwise, we've just choked the frequency all the way down and there's nothing to turn it up. So control output from the envelope generator and hook that up to the frequency and see what we get. There we go. And I'm going to take down the resonance because that's a little too high, little science fiction there. So we're back to our original patch. Okay, now if you are good with MIDI, you can hook up a Midi keyboard and do all kinds of sequencing and things like this. But you can also do sequencing using control voltages like they did in the good old days. And if you're a fan of Tangerine Dream, a lot of their long jams, they just turn on the sequencer, the analog sequencer, and plug it and let it go. So let's add a sequencer and see how we can use that. So I'm going to right click on the empty space here. And on the second row, all the way to the right, is this module called Seq3 for sequencer. I'm going to click that and put that right here. Okay, now it's a little hard to see, but it's actually stepping through each one of these rows is a step in the sequencer. And it's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, going back. These get a little bit brighter. It's very subtle when it's on that sequence. I'm not sure if that's even coming across on the video, but it should be coming across if you have it. And so this is sequencing at a rate controlled by this clock here. If I can make this go faster, you can see it blink faster, or you can make it slower. You can put it there. And to show you how this works, I'm going to use this gate. Instead of the keyboard gate, I'm going to use this particular gate. This is an output to trigger our envelope generator. So every time this thing gives a gate signal, it's going to trigger the envelope generator. So I'm going to disconnect the keyboard here, this gate, just grab it, and then I'm going to hook up. Now this is just going to keep on going and going and going. So I'm going to very quickly mute it here using the mixer channel, but let's see if that works. Okay, you can also stop it using the run stop button here. Okay, so you can kind of see how this is just generating a repeated trigger as if you were pressing the keyboard repeatedly. All right. Now, what all these rows here, these are voltage control outputs, and each one of these knobs generates a certain voltage at a certain time. The top row gives you the voltage that comes out of this jack, the middle row gives you the voltages that come out of this jack, and the bottom row gives you voltages that come out of this jack. So instead of playing this thing from the keyboard, we can play it from the sequencer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect the voltage per octave from the keyboard. Actually, I'm going to leave that there. Let us hook up row 1 here to the frequency modulation. Okay. Now what this is going to do is now this top row, each one of these knobs will let me change the voltage coming out and will change the frequency or the pitch at that particular step in the sequence. I'm also going to take the number of steps and I'm going to turn that down to 4 just so it's a little bit easier to hear and listen. All right, so I'm going to turn it on and let's see what happens. Okay, well, nothing's happening because all these knobs are the same. I'm going to make the first step higher. Okay, this is going to generate a higher voltage, which would be a higher pitch. And I also need to remember to turn up the control voltage on this frequency modulation input so it actually gets the oscillator. All right, and here we go. Oh, hey, how cool is that? I got almost an exact octave just to be lucky. All right, and if we do this, the first and the third step, then we get the safety dance almost. See how that works? And so now I'll just let it run and just change some of these knobs here, and that will give us a little sequence. So you can take You can add another sequencer if you want a longer sequence. I'm not going to do that here. This reset output will, you can daisy chain these. You can make this go faster and slower. You can a clock. Okay, and say if you don't want to trigger on every note, then you can only have it trigger on one note down there. Okay, so that's just playing one note and it's silent for 3 notes and it's back to 1. Okay, oops. Just going to check the chat here. Hopefully that's okay. All right, hope people are doing okay. This isn't going too fast. All right, so one more little trick I want to show you is how to combine multiple inputs into a single output. Because if I want to trigger this on 1 and 3, that won't connect because you can't connect 2 outputs together to the same input. But there's a module that will let you do that. And so I'm just going to add it here. And it is called the Unity module. Okay, what this is kind of a little mixer. It takes all these inputs and combines them into output. And you can either do the average or the sum. And for the control voltages, I think we'll stick with the sum. So what I can do is have the gate come with the output there. And then now I can connect up to 6 of these trigger inputs. If I want this to trigger on 1 and 3 there. So now I'm going to run this and see if this works. Okay, so now we are now all ready to start building up a little drum machine. Okay, so let's make some drum sounds now. All right, and I think I mentioned how you could use the noise source to get a nice Kraftwerk snare. So let's do that. All right, so I'm going to disconnect the voltage controlled oscillator here from the voltage controlled filter. And I'm going to connect the white noise here. And this should, when we trigger this, this should give us a nice snare sound when we adjust the frequency and the attack. Let's see what this sounds like. All right, that's not bad. I think a snare has a little less attack, so I'm going to take that down. Maybe make the decay a little bit faster. There we go. And maybe a little less filter modulation. I'm going to turn the control voltage effect down a little bit. Oh, maybe I need a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to turn this down and then turn up the frequency so it's not completely gated up. What that does. Okay, and I'm going to turn the release down a little bit too so it doesn't quite last so long. Ooh, that's a nice gated snare. Phil Collins, eat your heart out. All right, that's not a bad snare. And so you can see all the nice ways you can change the timbre and the decay and the attack and the sounds of that snare. So that's pretty powerful thing. Okay, let's hook up another patch. Let's make an 808 kick. Now, if you know the 808 kick, it's just kind of a decaying, it's a sine wave, and it decays a little bit with frequency over time. All right, so I'm going to build, let me move around here just so we have enough room. So we're not using the oscillator at all. We're using the noise source. So I'm going to delete the oscillator and I'm going to put the noise up there. So this is our signal chain for our snare drum. And so give me some room down here to make a kick drum. And so with the kick drum, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a voltage controlled frequency, voltage controlled filter module as an oscillator. Okay. And then I'm going to add another envelope generator to trigger it. Okay, so ADSR, top right of the module list. Once again, to get this list, right click on an empty space and you will see this big list of modules. All right. So we need to patch this in so we can hear it. I'm going to patch this into channel 2 of the mirror, the output of the frequency. Low pass filter there goes to input 2. All right, and I'm going to turn up the resonance just so we can hear it. It starts to resonate around 3 o'clock, if I remember. There it is. Okay, and now we're going to change the frequency of this voltage controlled filter with this envelope generator. Are people doing okay? Is this about the right pace? Should I take a break and let people play with things? Yep, we're running way ahead of schedule. So there's definite time to play with things or slow down and stretch out a little bit, or we can just power through and then I'll let you play with things and answer questions. Awesome. Sounds like that. Okay, got a question that the white noise is not working. First thing to check is if it's patched through your filter, make sure that that filter knob, the frequency knob, is up pretty high. Because if that's all the way down, you just may not be letting any sound through at all. Okay, Bob, I'm sorry. I will have to get back to you on that. Okay. Okay, Christopher's not hearing noise from the white noise sound. Something to do to test your white noise is to unhook the gate from the Unity module and plug the gate back into the keyboard, and that way when you hit a key, you should hear the noise through the filter. Okay. So let's power through. Let's make a pretty simple patch, which is going to be an 808 kick drum, and then we can put everything together with the sequencer. Okay, so you trigger the envelope generator with a gate. So right now I'm just going to use the keyboard. I'm going to disconnect it here and the gate from the keyboard. So every time I hit the key, it'll trigger this envelope generator. And you're not going to hear anything because it doesn't control anything, but I'm just going to hit a key and you should see it sequence. The output of this ADSR, I'm going to plug into the frequency response of the filter, and we're using the filter here as an oscillator. So we're going to turn up the resonance here and okay, turn up the control voltage. All right, that's almost where we are. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to connect the ADSR hit control to the mixer. And what that does is this is an amplifier which is controlled by this envelope generator too. So now this is only going to turn on the amplifier when this ADSR is giving us an output. So since we have the gate from the keyboard hooked up to the ADSR, I can hit a key and hear the filter ringing. I'm going to turn up the resonance just a little bit here. And now we can change the SR to give us the response we want. Okay, I'm going to turn down the attack, make that super short. You know what? I'm not going to use the release at all. I'm going to turn down the sustain all the way, and we're just going to use the decay. If you've ever used an 808, I think there's two knobs on the kick drum. It's decay, rate, and the frequency. So the voltage controlled filter, the frequency will give the frequency of our kick drum, and this will give us the decay. All right, I'm going to turn up the volume just a little bit. Actually, probably do that with the resonance. Okay, so that's a annoying sin drum, but if we change the frequency, we can take that down to a nice kick drum. And for this, you're going to need headphones. Oh, yeah. Okay, I don't know if anybody can hear that without headphones, but that for me, and not even let that through, but for me, that's a pretty good kick drum. I'm going to turn that up a little higher, like a tom-tom, just so people can hear it. I'm going to give it a little more gain too. Okay, so now we're ready to put everything together. All right, we have our kick drum, which I'm triggering with the keyboard here, tom-tom, and we have our snare, which is being triggered by the keyboard here. That down. I'm going to turn the sustain down on the snare. Okay, and we have our sequencer, so now we can hook everything together. All right, so on the sequencer, right now, the steps 1 and 3 go to this unity, so the output will trigger on 1 and 3. So let us trigger the kick on 1 and 3. All right, and then let's use the other section of the unity to trigger the snare on 2 and 4. Okay, and this is the gate we're using to trigger the snare. We're going to disconnect that from the keyboard and connect the sequencer to the gate. So now if everything's working and I hit run, we're going to get a little kick snare, kick snare, kick snare. Oh yeah. All right, so this is about pretty much everything I had planned to show you. There's lots more things to play with, or maybe people want to experiment, um, maybe get a sequence going with the sequencer, start fresh with a new thing, explore some of the other modules. Anyway, I think we're scheduled for another 10 minutes, so I'm happy to hang out and answer questions or let you play. And I hope I didn't lose too many people. And you are now have the fundamentals of analog synthesis. So congratulations, I would give you all a diploma. Once again, if you go to the VCV Rack website and you create a login, which is free, there's a zillion more modules. Just the stock program has 37 modules. There's lots and lots of crazy stuff, and there's a link on the Wikipedia on the wiki page uh, to a video where somebody has done a very nice patch using sequencers and to trigger different synths, and it has a couple really nice jams. Go to YouTube, see what people are doing. Very inspirational. You can actually make music with this, not just little bleeps and bloops like we were doing. Um, Oh, that's a great question. Pete says, do I have any saved that I can perform for you? Um, uh, ELE, I'm not sure there's a recording feature, but you should be able to convince your computer to record whatever sounds coming out using a mixer. You might need some driver foo for that. Uh, Pete, that's a great suggestion. I have one saved patch, which is kind of interesting. Let me see if I can find that. Um, I'm going to do that. Okay. And this is an attempt to use two filters to get kind of a vowel sound. Um, and if you think of how your vocal track works, you have your vocal cords, which have this very buzzy kind of high excitation with a lot of harmonics. And so I'm using the square wave with the pulse width modulation set to 0. So that's got a very buzzy thing. And then I have two voltage controlled filters, and they're both being controlled by the same ADSR, but in different amounts. And these two filters are acting like resonances in your vocal tract. One is, whoops, I'll put that back there. One is a little higher than the other. These are formants. If you study speech, you know various resonances in your mouth happen at different frequencies, and it changes as you move your move your you move your mouth around as you are articulating. So what this is a crude attempt to get kind of a vowel sound. And let me play this. I forgot where I was with this. All right, might need to crank up the volume on that. People can hear that. And so depending on the amount that the different filters and the frequencies, you can get different kind of samples. This is the world's crudest vocoder because it's not actually analyzing any speech. It's just trying to simulate the resonances. Can I zoom out? I can most certainly zoom out. Thank you for that. And I'm going to put everything a little closer together so you can see it. And then I'll zoom in. Right, so let me play this a little bit more, and maybe I'll change some of the formants to see if anything even approaches at a vowel sound. Make that go a little faster. All right, let's change some of the formats. Right, so if you hear that, it's got a high resonance here. We're picking out the higher frequencies, the higher harmonics of this. And this is what people do who are throat singing. They're basically getting their vocal tracks to ring like this filter, which has a high resonance. This is also, I think, what you're doing with whistling. And so this controls how much of the envelope generator is going to each frequency. So we can change that a little bit. All right, that sounds a little bit to me like wow. So we get, here's the lower frequency resonance. I'm going to play around with that a little bit. Yeah, less like a vowel. That's more like an oh-ah. Yeah, so you kind of see the power of this when you can hook up a lot of these things. And the beauty of this program, yeah, exactly like a Jaws harp, because that's what you're doing is you're using this kind of buzzy excitation from the little reed that's vibrating, and you're using your mouth, the resonance of your mouth, exactly like a filter to enhance some of the frequencies and attenuate other ones. All right. Yes, exactly. The Tibetan harmonic singers, I think that's exactly what they're doing. They've trained their the resonances in their vocal tract to resonate very well and very sharply, just like we turned up the resonance of this voltage controlled filter. You can kind of hear that. We can pick out some of the harmonics. All right, we're running out of time. This concludes this workshop. Thank you, everybody. My contact information is on the wiki for this thing. Bob, I owe you some further information. Shoot me an email. I'll just put my email in the chat here. And this concludes the workshop. Thanks, everybody. Have fun patching.